Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
It's less than 100 miles from Armageddeon to Gaza. I have made the journey. Are we all about to make that journey? But this time in reverse and baking with white phosphorus. Robert Fisk remembered, and Ursula von der Leyen is unequivocal. Cutting off people's electricity and water and food is nothing more than an act of terrorism. You didn't expect that from her, did you? All will be revealed. We'll be talking to two very significant guests in the great arguments that are raging now about whether or not the Israeli operation against the 2.2 million people in Gaza is a war crime. It's all coming up over the next 2 hours. Fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy night.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway. The mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway. The world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
Armageddon really is a place, and it is less than 100 miles away from the Gaza fence, at least as was. Question is, are we now on the brink of making the journey in the opposite direction? There are very good reasons for thinking so. Not only is Gaza being reduced to rubble and thousands of people killed and wounded in a place they cannot escape from by the world's most fearsome weaponry, supplied gratis, indeed, with money attached by the United States of America. The Israeli Air Force, because there is no ground incursion, therefore there is no fighting directly between Israel and the resistance movements, the most significant of which is Hamas, but there are many, many others. There's no ground incursion, therefore no one can know who is being killed by the shot and shell and missiles that are raining down on the little tiny place that we call Gaza. The Gaza Strip. It's called a strip for a reason. It's a narrow strip of land. It's less than 25 miles long, and it is less than 5.5 miles in width. There are no entrances and no exits that are open. Israel controls most of them, and Egypt controls one of them. And Israel makes it clear by one way or another that it will not permit Egypt to open its gate at the frontier. And if Egypt shows signs, as it did this week, of disobeying orders, sending a huge convoy of humanitarian aid, Israel bombs the Eretz crossing point. Having said that the Palestinians in Gaza should leave, it bombed the place, the only place by which they could leave. The truth is, this is shooting fish in a barrel, because half of the population of Gaza are women and children. Half of them are children, and half of them are women and girls. And so the statistical probability overwhelmingly is that the majority of casualties will be women or girls. And it turns out they are. According to the Ministry of Health, 60% of the people in Gaza's hospitals are children. Now, I want to make one or two things clear, some of them painfully clear. Killing civilians is a sin and a crime in any religion and in any system of law. Taking women and children as hostages is also a sin in any religion and a crime in any jurisdiction. Therefore, the prison break, which I talked about at some length on Sunday, and which has now attracted more than 10 million viewers of what I have had to say in the last 72 hours, was, of course, entirely to be expected, as Gideon Levy, the greatest living Israeli, pointed out pointedly, powerfully, emotionally in the hours after the event. But the subsequent events included war crimes and crimes against humanity. Of course, the lie machine has gotten to work on what happened after the prison break occurred. All kinds of horror stories, many of which have now had to be walked back, or in the case of the LA Times, recanted, were clearly the products of the feverish workings of the propaganda lie machine. In parenthesis, I point out to you, courtesy of my good friend Ian Puddock, that on this day, 33 years ago, a suitably veiled young woman appeared in front of the United Nations, described as a nurse from the hospital, the children's hospital, the maternity ward in Kuwait City, and she tearfully, sobbing through her veil, pious, you see, couldn't be identified, sobbing through her veil, she told the world that she had personally witnessed Iraqi soldiers removing babies from their incubators, throwing them on the floor, stealing the incubators, unplugging them from the wall, and taking them away back to Iraq. It wasn't just a bright, shining lie. It was an expensively purchased lie. A public relations firm in Washington had been hired to manufacture the lie. And the young woman behind the veil was not a nurse, had not been in Kuwait, and had not seen what she claimed to have seen. She was the daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador in Washington, D.C., hence the need for a veil. I close the parenthesis now because I'm going to get on to very sensitive topics. When I learned that 40 Israeli babies had been decapitated by Hamas individuals who had been part of the prison breakout, I was filled with a dread, a chill that I cannot properly describe to you. If this story had been true, it would have joined the annals of the most depraved, debased, cold-blooded murder, slaughter of the innocents in all history. I immediately doubted it, of course, for lots of reasons. The first was that if this had really happened, the gigantic, best in the world, best in class Israeli propaganda machine would have immediately removed any doubt about whether or not it had happened. We would have seen the pictures, at least of the children while they were still alive. We probably would have seen the blurred images of the decapitated babies. But we have seen none of those things. Even the Israeli state television reporter who first claimed that this had happened, then said she had no evidence that it had happened, but soldiers had told her that it had happened. Max Blumenthal, may God preserve him, and Grey Zone have now tracked down who was the soldier, singular, who told this reporter this hideous, demonic story. And he turns out to be a fanatic settler leader, not just a fanatic settler leader, but the leader of a particularly atrocious cult of Israeli illegal settlers on the West Bank who had only days before said that he wanted to entirely erase from the earth a Palestinian town. This story was a lie, just like the Iraqi incubator story, just like Gaddafi giving Viagra to his soldiers to carry out rapes in Libya before the Islamist fanatics were helped into power in Tripoli by France, Britain, and the United States of America. Just like so many fake atrocity stories which are manufactured to manufacture consent for what is about to happen or what is already happening. This story was a foul lie. The liar will never be judged in this life. But the Western journalists, and I include every single British newspaper that ran with this story on their front pages today, even though by the time the paper had come off the press, even Sky News was saying that they would not broadcast this story because it was completely unverified, that they had asked the Israeli army 3 times if the story was true and had not yet, they said, and I can add, have not now had this story verified. It is a lie. And if the crime would have been as grave and depraved a crime as can possibly be imagined, the crime of inventing it to distract attention from the actual decapitation of hundreds of Palestinian children under the bombardment in Gaza, itself ranks in the annals of the sick art of atrocity propaganda to justify one's own atrocities. The hottest circle in hell awaits those, including some senior people, who ought to have known better, maybe did know better, retailed this story to justify the slaughter of the innocents in Gaza, on which they have made no comment at all. I've seen them, so have you, or you wouldn't be here. These children, charred remains of children, being carried out of burning buildings, collapsed buildings. You've seen them. But the vast majority of the public in Britain and America, and I dare say other European countries, have not seen them, will not be shown them. Indeed, the European Union has threatened Elon Musk and Twitter because these videos are seen, at least on some social media platforms. We've seen the hysterical woman weeping for her 2 infants, and the only thing she could say is, "My children died hungry. They hadn't even eaten, and now they are dead." We've seen the man holding his infant daughter for the last time, stiff and lifeless, with a hole in the side of her head. We've seen the burnt offering of children being carried from those buildings. And none of these correspondents that retailed a fake story about murdered infants have shown the slightest interest in enlightening their, in some cases, massive followings on social media. This reality that I am describing to you now. More than 1,000 Palestinians are dead in this carnage of the last 72 hours or so. And more than 1,000 Israelis are dead in the same 72 hours or so. In ordinary times, in former times, such horror would have precipitated a massive international effort and demand for a ceasefire and immediate negotiations to bring about an end to this carnage and an end to its endless repetition every 4 years or so. But not this time. Joe Biden, instead of demanding a ceasefire, has sent not one but 2 American aircraft carriers to the shores of the Levant in the Mediterranean. As President Putin put it today, what have you done that for? To frighten people? The people in Gaza, in Palestine, in Lebanon, in Syria are no longer frightened of anything, least of all you, Joe Biden. The Western governments, and that's why I now say this is a NATO war, are all, every one of them, explicitly and overwhelmingly, in total, absolutely unequivocal support for Netanyahu, the same Netanyahu that many of them and their tame journalists were telling us had now formed a cabinet of far-right fanatics, even fascists, just a few short months ago, that were showcasing the demonstrations of millions in Israel to bring Netanyahu down, are now 100% behind him, sending him weapons like he needed more weapons, sending him money like he needed more money, sending their ministers, James not so cleverly today, scurrying like a rat into an air raid shelter when he heard the sirens. The Palestinians in Gaza have no sirens, and they have no air raid shelters. They have nowhere to hide, Mr. Cleverly, unlike you. The NATO powers are now so fully invested in this war that Zelensky is almost in a state of collapse. All the buildings that used to sport his colors are now sported in the colors of others. All the money that used to come to him is now instead being diverted to the latest thing, to the latest NATO war. Zelensky knows the game is up. The Russian armed forces are advancing rapidly, and not a single news outlet in the Western world any longer gives a damn. As vivid a vindication of what we have said all along as you could possibly imagine. The poor Ukrainian people, sacrificed, hundreds of thousands of them, for one NATO war, are now forgotten by the NATO countries in favor of the next thing. the next war. But this next war is going to be the big war. It's going to be a war like no other. 1 million Israelis were hiding in air raid shelters this very afternoon because the alarm was triggered that the Lebanese resistance, Hezbollah, had sent drones and paragliding troops and were firing heavy weapons across Israel's northern border. And they were right to take shelter, because if and when that happens, it will be a terrible, terrible whirlwind. As it happens, it was a false alarm. The Israeli alarm system had been triggered, it seems, by birds. But that's how close we are to a general conflagration in the Levant. Hezbollah have said if there is a ground invasion by Israel, they will enter the war. If they enter the war, Israel will then be fighting on two fronts until the other fronts almost immediately open up. Because the Palestinians, the Lebanese have friends all over the region. And their biggest friend of all is Iran, which is more than capable of turning this war into the kind of ruination of the world economy and maybe the world itself that was described so vividly by Scott Ritter on this show on Sunday night. Now, Mrs. von der Leyen, alone amongst all the Western statesmen and women, was unequivocal when she spoke about the act of terrorism. It's the only thing you can call it, she said, cutting off people's water, electricity at the onset of winter, cutting off people's food, water, electricity was terrorism. But tweets are receipts, you see. And I found one from Ursula von der Leyen. Attacks against civilian infrastructure, especially electricity, are war crimes. Cutting off men, women, children of water, electricity and heating. With winter coming, these are acts of pure terror, and we have to call it as such. She issued that tweet on the 19th of October, 2022. The sharp-eyed viewer will have realized that I left out one word, her first word. Russia's attacks against civilian infrastructure, especially electricity, are war crimes. Cutting off men, women and children of water, electricity and heating. With winter coming, these are acts of pure terror, but only if these terrorist acts are threatened by Russia. If they're actually carried out by Israel, these acts of pure terror have Mrs. von der Leyen's full support and the support of every other hireling in the European Union. That's so good. We really need to hear her saying it, don't we? Let's hear her. Pay attention.
The international order is very clear. These are war crimes. Targeted attacks on civilian infrastructure with a clear aim to cut off men, women, children of water, electricity and heating. With the winter coming, these are acts of pure terror, and we have to call it as such.
There's not really much you can say about that depth of cynicism, double standards, hypocrisy. Is there anything left to say other than the words that dripped from her own mouth? These people are beyond wicked. They are evil. We are led by evil people. Those who are facilitating the mass murder of innocent civilian Palestinians are evil people. And unfortunately, whether you like it or not, they're doing it in our name. Now we are asking on the poll this evening, is Israel's massive attack on Gaza justified or a war crime? Almost 25,000 people have already voted. We need you to have your say now. I'll be right back with the one and only Lowkey on this, I'm sure, and other matters. Stay tuned.
Mr. President, we got a report of a 50-foot woman marauding through Washington, sir.
Thank you, Captain. But I'm looking for a shorter woman, one who likes to take long strolls in the park and yell at minorities.
She's not looking for a date. She's terrorizing the city.
Is there a difference? A little levity. Call in the military.
We are the military, sir.
Boy, we got here fast. We better do something, right?
Shall I scramble the jets, Mr. President?
No thanks. I'll just take a muffin and some coffee.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Now, I'll be talking to Lowkey in a minute about one KC. Here's a better one from Julian Maylan's KC, King's Counsel. I have said for months that the British mainstream press, especially the newspapers, as a result of their dishonest reporting of the origins and course of the Ukraine war, are dishonest. But today's newspaper front pages are surely even worse. Let us resolve never to buy them. So you can vote on the poll. Is Israel's massive attack on Gaza? It's looking like a record poll, this. Is it justified or is it a war crime? If you want to comment on anything I've said or didn't say, then you can call free of charge. If you're in the UK or Ireland, 08081 965522. That's 08081 965522. And if you're in the US and Canada, again, entirely free of charge, toll free, +1 844 944 3344. That's +1 844 944 3344. And if you're in the rest of the world, it's 44203 966 2625. Lowkey is a rapper. He's an activist. He's the founder of the Watchdog portal. And he once traveled through the night with me to Gaza. Apart from all of that, he's actually a genius. He won't thank me for saying so, but you'll agree, I'm sure, at the end of this interview. Lowkey, thank you very much for joining us. I want to start with someone that I couldn't bring myself to talk about in my opening. Sir KeirStarmer, KC, the leader of Her Majesty's opposition in Parliament, went on a British radio station this morning and said that Israel has the right to cut off water and electricity from the people in Gaza, acts which Mrs. von der Leyen described as acts of pure terror last year, and acts which are explicitly forbidden in international law and the laws of war. How did we reach such a stage? Your views?
Well, it seems, George, and thank you for having me, that KeirStarmer is actually more pro-Israel than Philadelphia's favorite son, Benjamin Netanyahu. Let's not forget that what you have just described are forms of collective punishment, which is a war crime according to the Geneva Conventions. And KeirStarmer is supposedly a human rights lawyer who should know that. But instead, KeirStarmer is somebody that for a long time has cavorted with the Israel lobby in this country and done its bidding to the nth degree. We cannot forget that one of the key funders of KeirStarmer has been Trevor Chin. Trevor Chin is a key figure in the Israel lobby and a former director of BICOM, which is the Israel lobby group that through its We Believe in Israel project, led by Luke Akehurst, who's on the Labour Party's NEC, sought to have my music removed from Spotify. But I'll tell you something about KeirStarmer, George, that maybe the viewers may not know. That despite his servility to the Israel lobby, even within his own constituency, Israel is so unpopular that the headquarters of Elbit Systems, Israel's largest arms company, was driven out of the constituency by Palestine Action, the direct action organization that has taken to shutting down Israeli arms factories in this country. So even in the constituency of KeirStarmer, Elbit Systems was driven out. So despite his best efforts to prostitute himself to the Israel lobby, it does not seem like it is getting across to the public. That sentiment is not shared by the masses.
He doesn't really mean it, Lowkey. If he did, it wouldn't make it any better, but I can tell you he doesn't really mean it. I was at a meeting against Israel's aggression that he addressed in 2015. I've also seen the video of a meeting he addressed calling on the football authorities to kick Israel out of FIFA. The truth is, this man is just a rancid, lying opportunist. That's all. Don't know if that makes it any better or even worse. What do you think?
Well, I believe it. I mean, we also know that prior to that period of time that you're talking about, he was the director of public prosecutions. Now, during that time, the only foreign state attorney that he met with and accepted gifts and hospitality from was Moshe Lador, who was the state attorney of Israel. And not long after that, he made the decision to block the prosecution of Tzipi Livni, somebody that myself and yourself have stood on platforms protesting against and denounced from those platforms when there were arrest warrants actually put out for her in this country by judges. He, as director of public prosecution, blocked that prosecution. We also won't forget that during the protests against Operation Carcelid, where we saw many young North African and Middle Eastern youth criminalized after they were beaten by police outside the Israeli embassy 2008, 2009, it was KeirStarmer who was director of public prosecution at the time when a lot of those young men ended up serving years in prison. So I believe you, but I also believe that he may be the type of person who does not have any solid convictions and blows with the wind when it serves his interests.
Well, speaking of blowing with the wind, the first time I ever came across white phosphorus, I was in Beirut in 1982 when Israel invaded Lebanon in what they called Operation Grapes of Wrath. And the Times, as was then, had the peerless Robert Fisk as their correspondent on the front line. How times have changed. And Robert Fisk wrote a piece about the effect of white phosphorus. He talked of being in the hospital wards in Beirut, where children had smoke coming out of their mouths and nose because they had ingested this white phosphorus gas, which then proceeded, as he put it, to literally cook them from the inside. And nothing could be done to help them. They burned to death from the inside from the white phosphorus, which is now a war crime officially to use against civilian targets. But Israel is now not only using white phosphorus in Gaza, it was using it again in Lebanon yesterday. And I haven't seen that even reported anywhere. Your thoughts?
Well, let's be clear. The United States also used white phosphorus in Fallujah, and we saw that, along with the use of depleted uranium, being blamed by many for the increase to an exponential level of the amount of cancers that are in the area of Fallujah. Now, part of the reason that Israel is able to do this is those weapons often come from the United States, but the funding to buy the weapons comes from the United States. And we're not just speaking in sentimental language when we say that. The United States literally gives $10.4 million a day, $430,000 an hour, $7,229 a minute, and $120 a second of US taxpayers' money, supposedly, to racist Israeli apartheid in Palestine. And I tell you, US politicians, when you consider that equation, are fairly cheap, because in 2020, pro-Israel lobby groups only spent about $33 million on funding members of US Congress. And you'll be interested to know that the Democrats almost got double the amount that the Republicans got from the Israel lobby at that time. And we remember in 2021, after Ma'arakat Sayf al-Quds, the battle of the Unity Intifada, as it was known, you saw US Congress vote immediately to give another $1 billion on top of all of that to Israel, which was then given directly to the US arms company Raytheon and the Israeli arms company Rafael to replenish the Iron Dome system. So this is what we are talking about. And it was interesting, George, that you mentioned earlier NATO's involvement, and in many ways Ukraine and Palestine are now front lines of NATO's war against the global south. But Israel is believed to have carried out assassinations in at least 18 other sovereign states, from Italy to France to Cyprus to Greece to Norway to Germany to the UAE to Egypt to Jordan to Uruguay, Lebanon, Brazil, Tunisia, Belgium, Malta, Malaysia, Syria, Iran. Several of these states are NATO nations, but yet they do not believe in their own sovereignty to the extent that they would back Israel in the way they would do, despite the fact that Israel is believed to have carried out assassinations on their soil.
You're a Rolls Royce of a young man. I'm sure everyone else that's watching is thinking that too. Sorry to raise this. I was looking at a video just minutes ago before the show started of us on the march with the lovely Annie Lennox and other people from the music industry marching against the, I think, 2008 war, but it may have been one of the interminable others. But the music industry today was summed up by Justin Bieber, who, thanks to you, I know, put out a tweet with a picture of the destroyed Gaza with the words, "I stand with Israel" on it. He thought the picture was Israel, but was in fact the handiwork of Israel in Gaza? What's happened to the music industry, the cultural milieu? Because from what I can see, even the right-wing, so-called right-wing populists demanding freedom of speech and freedom not to wear a mask and all of that, they have all fallen in behind the drums of war and genocide. What's happened, Lowkey?
Well, when it comes to the music industry, you may be interested to know that some of the most interesting and politically challenging music historically was released on Universal Music Group. So, for instance, Reggae for Peach, the song for Blair Peach that was released, came out on who was killed by the police in the 80s, if I remember correctly, or maybe the late 70s. This was released on Universal.
70s, yeah.
But the 70s. But today, Universal is headed by a gentleman by the name of Lucian Grange. Now, Lucian Grange attended a fundraiser for the IDF in 2016. His wife is also a key donor to the Conservative Party and to the Zionist Federation. On top of that, you now have a director of Universal Music Group by the name of Haim Saban, who is one of the largest fundraisers for the Israeli military in its history. And he's credited with scripting Joe Biden's Palestine policy. On top of that, you have another Israel lobby group within the music industry called the Creative Community for Peace, which is the same organization as Stand With Us. It's headed by someone called Dave Renzer, who also came out of Universal Music Group. So just to make clear how powerful Universal is, we're talking about the Beatles, we're talking about Michael Jackson, we're talking about Bob Marley, we're talking about some of the biggest artists that have ever existed, assigned to a label which, at least for the last 10 years, has pro-Israel figures at the helm. And we can also say that Lucian Grange, he's recently been put on the board of trade by the Conservative government. He was a regular guest to David Cameron at Chequers. And Lucian Grange has so much power in the music industry that in 2019, he earned in bonuses in 1 year as much money as all UK songwriters made off of streams in 1 year. This is the CEO of Universal Music. So essentially the same dynamics which dominate the media industry also dominate the music industry. So I think that discourages artists to really study these issues in depth and definitely steers them away from supporting the Palestinians in the way that maybe Annie Lennox and others did previously.
Lowkey, thanks for joining us on the mother of all talk shows, and the best of luck with your music career. Is Israel's massive attack on Gaza justified? Well, on Telegram, 10% say it's justified. On Twitter, 18% say it's justified. On the YouTube community poll, well, there's been a bit of a push. 22% say that it's justified. And on the YouTube stream, 10% say that it's justified. That means, therefore, that on Telegram, 90% say it's a war crime. On Twitter, 82% say it's a war crime. On the YouTube community, 78% say it's a war crime. And on the YouTube stream, 90% say it's a war crime. 25,533 votes have been cast. You can cast yours, must cast yours before the end of this show. I'll be right back. 1 minute. Count them. You don't get to call me far right. You don't get to call me that on my own show. A lifelong socialist, the leader of a socialist party, the Workers' Party of Britain, with an Indonesian wife, with 5 mixed-race children, with a record of fighting racism all of my life, representing more people of colour in the British Parliament than anyone in history by a country mile. You don't get to call me far right. These kind of idiotic insults tossed around by infantile leftists who think that anyone to the right of them is a fascist, is a racist. They are the cause of the crashing and burning of what used to be called the left. They are the cause of it. They have discredited leftism with their foolish, idiot isms and ists and smears that emanate from them like a bad smell.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
An email from John, who's in Budapest. When is Sean Penn, Bono, and the rest of the A-listers going to be flying into Gaza to support the brave Palestinians fighting against the invaders? Brilliant, brilliant, John. Usman is in Las Vegas, but wants to talk about Palestine. I think that's the perfect encapsulation of a global university of the airwaves. Usman, welcome to the show. What would you like to say?
Yes. Hi, George. Man, I'm so stressed with all what is going on in this world. It looks like there are two types of laws. Law one is for the Western world. Law two is for the poor people like Gaza. But my main point is, what is the Arab world doing to help Gaza? Saudi Arabia, right? Jordan. What are they doing to help these poor people? What are they doing? 5 days of non-stop bombing. What are they doing to help these poor people? I don't just get it. Thank you so much. I am so stressed.
Of course, yeah, we're all stressed with it, Osman. I don't blame you at all. It's a nightmare, I can assure you, for me. A living nightmare, and I'm not under the bombs. Well, wisely, Saudi Arabia has informed the United States that it is breaking off any negotiations in which it might have been involved concerning normalization of relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel. That's a significant step, and I commend the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, for that. Secondly, bin Salman said that the only solution for this is the creation now, not in 30 years, but now, of an independent Palestinian state. Now, you know my view. I think the prospects of that two-state solution that I supported 30 years ago when the Oslo Agreement was reached and signed is in practical terms impossible to achieve now. But, as I said on Sunday, bring it. If you say it's the solution, bring it. Implement it right now. The 1967 borders, with East Jerusalem as the capital, bring it. If it works, great. I'll be the first one to take my hat off. King Abdullah of Jordan has said the same thing. And millions of Jordanian people are on the streets demonstrating in support of the Palestinian people. At least half of the population of Jordan are, in any case, Palestinians who were driven from Palestine in 1948, in 1967, and at other auspicious occasions, like 1970. The reality is that the Arabs are hopeless. I mean that literally, with a hyphen. They are hopeless. Their regimes are hopeless, and therefore useless in this regard. Their words are good. I welcome them. We even discovered the Arabs had a league because their leader, the general secretary, flew to Moscow. He's there now, talking with Lavrov and Putin in Moscow. Good. It's good that these things are said. It's good that such performative actions are taken, but the Arab regimes are not capable of. They have not the strength to, and they are fundamentally compromised in a way that makes it impossible, even if they wanted to, for them to effectively intervene. If I give one example, the UAE, whose late ruler, Sheikh Zayed, was a personal friend of mine. I met him many times. He was a very great man. There's a square in Gaza called Sheikh Zayed Square. It has just been completely destroyed. Every brick of Sheikh Zayed Square has been blown away. And anyone who happened to be in Sheikh Zayed Square was destroyed. One would have thought, given the name that the square bore, that the UAE would rise up in anguish. I could almost hear from his grave the late and great Sheikh Zayed calling out from his grave at this desecration of his memory and his beneficence. The UAE is the only Arab country, the only one, to issue more or less explicit support for Netanyahu over the last 72 hours. I've probably said as much as I should about that. But all is not lost. The masses in these Arab countries, all of them, from Marrakesh to Bahrain, from the Atlantic to the Gulf, are 100% behind the Palestinian people. And their rulers have to take account of that. And in Lebanon, and in Syria, and in Iraq, and in Iran, and in the Yemen, there are governments, armed forces, powerful armed forces that stand behind the Palestinian cause in this darkest hour. And those gaily acting in a way that will turn this Israel-Palestine war into a war against all of the aforementioned are going to bring about world war, because the only way that Israel could possibly prevail against all of these enemies is to use the illegally acquired, undeclared nuclear weapons that they have in their hundreds in Dimona in the Negev desert. And if they did, this would bring in Russia and China, who stand behind this axis of resistance that I just described. So, careful what you wish for. I know some of you are power drunk over the possibility of Gaza being literally leveled, becoming just a beach. Some of you are intoxicated with the idea that if you kill 10,000, 100,000, 1 million Palestinians, that this issue will be resolved. It will not. But in the act of trying, in the act of killing, you may very well be bringing us into World War III. Now, I'll be speaking at the No to NATO meeting at 9 p.m. UK time tomorrow evening, online on all platforms. There's the lineup. Professor Syed Mohammed Marandi, oftentimes a guest on this show. Tara Reid, now in exile because she accused Joe Biden, when he was a senator, of sexual offenses against her. Richard Medhurst, one of the brightest stars in the internet firmament, and again a guest on this show many times, with me as the speaker. It's at 9 p.m. UK time on all of my platforms tomorrow evening. The tide turns, it was called, before the events of the last 3 days. But there's no reason to change that title. So 26,650 votes have been cast, and therefore this is officially the biggest ever Mother of All Talk Shows poll. 26,650 people have voted, and I'll give you the result of the poll at the end. But if you want to have your say, please get your vote in now. Let's take a call from England, Essex, where Harry wants to talk about Palestine. Harry, welcome. What would you like to say?
Well, George, the thing about it is that I'd like to ask you for getting, and I agree with a lot of you've said in the past and disagree with some, but I'd like to ask you now, after Hezbollah did that, how can you justify calling it war crimes from Israel when, if they didn't do that, this wouldn't be happening?
Well, first of all, you must have missed my monologue, so I urge you to play it after the show, and you'll get my answer to the first part of your question. The second part, I'm sorry to say, because you sound like an elderly chap, that you're losing it. If they hadn't done this, this wouldn't be happening. Presupposes that it hasn't been happening every day for 75 years. All of the years of your life, Harry, Palestinians have been being slaughtered by Israel from the foundation of the state. In the Nakba, the catastrophe of 1948, from that day until this day, Israel has been slaughtering Palestinians. If you want to talk about Gaza alone, 4 times, in the last 15 years, there has been a gigantic assault on Gaza, which has killed thousands, if you add them all together, tens of thousands of Palestinians. And my third point is, you called them Hezbollah, but they're actually called Hamas and Islamic Jihad and the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, and all these people that were in this operation 72 hours ago. They're not being killed by these bombs. You don't really think that, Harry, do you? You really think all these bombs and rockets are killing Hamas? You can see who they're killing. It's on video. A child cannot be a member of Hamas. But 60% of the casualties are children. So you're not fighting. They're not fighting Hamas. They're murdering children and women, babies and their mothers, their grandmothers, their aunts, their uncles, their fathers, their brothers, their sisters. That's who's being killed, not Hamas. If Israel were seriously intent on fighting Hamas, they would have invaded Gaza and gone looking for Hamas. I'm sure they would have come out to fight them like a man. But that's not what they did, is it? They're going to spend day after day, night after night, destroying Gaza, slaughtering innocent people, destroying even the ability of the hospitals to treat the wounded before they enter into Gaza, which would be ill-advised, in my view. First of all, bad enough having to fight in urban battles, as any soldier will tell you. It's even harder when virtually every building has been destroyed. Provides a lot of cover for men who have no fear of death to fight you back when you come in, but more importantly for the rest of us, Hezbollah has a red line. That's why they haven't intervened before now. If Israel invades Gaza in a ground invasion, Hezbollah will enter the war. Trust me, Harry, you ain't going to like that. On YouTube, Uzi 1mm says, I love the way George started off gently because Harry is ancient, then ended up yelling at him anyway. Uzi 1mm, I thought he deserved it. Last call before the break. Paul is in Salford in Palestine. Go ahead, Paul.
Hello, good evening, George.
Good evening, sir.
Yeah, it's a terrible thing that is happening in the Middle East on both sides, the Israelis and the Palestinians. But that being said, I feel that the way things are going, we're on the brink of Armageddon, because if this lot really blows up, it could lead to the Third World War.
Yeah, I believe that. I said so, and I believe it. Because this is existential for the Palestinians. They will not exist if they fail to defend themselves and their little strip of Palestine. And they have friends who gave them the weapons that they're using, gave them the wherewithal to fight back. And those friends are not going to abandon them. Nobody should put money on that. Nobody should bet on Hezbollah betraying the Palestinians. That will not happen. Neither should they put money on Iran betraying Hezbollah or the Palestinians. They will not do that. So this is becoming, when the American aircraft carriers arrive, this is becoming a confrontation of the gravest possible dimensions. And one wrong move, and the balloon could very well be up. See you on the other side. I'll be back in just a minute with the second hour. Thank you. Go ahead.
During your show in the past, you've often mentioned that Donald Trump would be a much better alternative than Biden, although you weren't a big fan of him, etc. And you said that in all likeliness, if he gets in power, he'll be much more appeasing towards Putin. There'll be less likely of the conflict to escalate. But I have to tell you, I'm not so sure about that. Really, I think the only way to solve all this, it doesn't matter if Kenny gets in or anyone else, because there's always going to be, at one stage of our lifetime, two psychotic leaders of the superpowers. Why hasn't anyone in your show or yourself mentioned anything about nuclear disarmament or CND? Surely the only way to save humanity is by nuclear disarmament. And I just wanted to see what you thought about that.
Yeah, well, of course, but how are you going to get that? I mean, does CND even still exist? They could have been leafleting outside every cinema showing Oppenheimer. But of course, they don't have enough people to fill a telephone box. It is the worst example I know of, although the Stop the War Coalition runs it close, of an organization that for its sectarian, internal, political reasons has thrown away its brand. I have not appeared on a Stop the War platform for an entire decade. Not to worry, no to NATO, no to war. Its rival organization attracts exponentially larger numbers of people. They cannot help themselves, these people. These members of leftist groupuscles have it in their DNA that they cannot get along with anybody who isn't exactly like them. And as the number of people who are exactly like them is mercifully tiny, they end up in tiny organizations. So, of course, I'm in favor of the destruction of nuclear weapons. But how are you going to get that? It's a totally utopian slogan to advance at this point in time. I'm just trying to stop the weapons from being used.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Now, a lot of people are trying to vote by phone. We're being inundated with people on the phone saying they want to vote by phone. You can't do that. You can vote on my Telegram channel, t.me/George Galloway. You can vote on my Twitter handle, George Galloway, blue tick, 522,000 followers or so on. Make sure you don't go to any imposters. You can vote on the YouTube community poll if you're watching this on YouTube, and you can vote on the YouTube stream if you are watching on that. 26,650 people have voted, which makes it a very large poll indeed, the largest that we have ever had, and an average of 85% or more say that Israel's actions constitute a war crime. Dan Cohen has been indefatigable in his defense of what's right and his defense of truth, not just on this conflict, but on many other things and for a very long time. And he's making a movie about Gaza. We'll ask him about that in a minute. But Dan Cohen, thanks for joining us again. I know that you're not having it easy. I saw some of the death threats that are being sent to you. And I know that in the United States, actually things have gone mad. At least there was a body of political opinion, we might call them the Trumpers, in the United States that were opposed to Joe Biden's war in Ukraine, and they had many big names attached to that opposition. But the right wing, the populists, the Trumpites are gung-ho for the slaughter in Gaza. How come?
Well, they simply don't have principles in their anti-war position. I mean, they've long been saying that they want the United States to stop focusing on funding the Ukraine proxy war and focus on China. That's what they've been seething for. And so I've advocated allying with the populist right with Ukraine, because this is just simple politics. We need as many people as possible to stop a war. But in this instance, when it comes to Israel, there is pro-war as anybody. So it's a very revealing moment. I mean, in terms of the harassment and threats I'm getting, it's I'm too laser focused, and I've seen too much in Gaza itself to worry about chatter on Twitter. But I mean, we're in a remarkable moment, George. I don't know if you saw this. I just saw right now before we started, Hamas actually released an Israeli woman and her child who from captivity, and there's video that Al Jazeera published showing them crossing the fence and being taken by Israeli authorities. So Hamas is actually demonstrating goodwill towards the Israeli public, the Israeli people, while Israel is obliterating Gaza and inventing stories about beheaded Israeli babies. I mean, this is remarkable.
Now, I saw a tweet from you. You bar mitzvahed in Jerusalem or Tel Aviv, I forget which, but you also lived in Gaza. That's quite a journey. Tell us about it.
Well, I mean, like, just any Jewish American, I was raised with the idea that Israel was some kind of liberal, inclusive, diverse paradise where Jews had a home. And so I had my bar mitzvah there with my family. And then years later, when I became more critical and I dove into journalism, I went to live in Palestine for some years and see what it was really like. And that was my initial experience in journalism. And that included 7 months inside the Gaza Strip, in which I filmed the documentary Killing Gaza, which I made with Max Blumenthal, and we released some years ago. So I don't think there is really any journalist in the United States or maybe in the West that has as intimate of a knowledge of both Palestinian and Israeli society as I do. So it's given me very unique insights, and I feel very privileged to be able to have had those experiences.
That's why they won't debate with you. I mean,
yeah, exactly.
Dan, you could wipe the floor with them precisely because of this identity of yours.
And not only, my identity certainly is one thing, but just, the fact that I've seen what Israeli state terrorism in Gaza means. I've seen the dead children. I've seen Israeli bunker busters take down 14-story tower buildings, that I later saw an Israeli general compare to 9/11. So I've seen too much. I know too much about what Israel does. I've seen their crimes, and so they won't let me on any mainstream media. They won't debate me. I just had the Israeli embassy in the U.S. attacking me on Twitter, calling me a spokesperson for Hamas, simply for saying that Israel should negotiate with Hamas to secure the release of these hostages and captives inside the Gaza Strip. And then, of course, Hamas releases one of the most vulnerable, the mother and child. So, I mean, there's just no way that any Zionist, any Israeli official can debate me. Neither will the right wing, any of these fake populist right wing phonies, Charlie Kirk or Ben Shapiro or Barry Weiss, who claims to be anti-woke but is just lying all the time. So they're all frauds, and I can expose them, but they're just afraid to debate me. It's that simple.
Yes, I know that feeling myself. The film that you made with Max Blumenthal, may God preserve him, is fantastically good and still available on YouTube. You can still watch it. You can watch it after this show, and you should. But you're now proposing to make another, which I predict will be a real blockbuster. Tell us about that.
Well, so I've been working on a film for several years that I can't actually say what exactly the contents are, what it's about right now, because I'm in the process of fundraising in order to secure the rights to it. But I can guarantee it is basically the most explosive film about Israeli society. I think that that I have seen, and it's partially done. And so I'm intending to finish it and release it as soon as I can secure the funding and complete the edition. And with, I was planning to finish it in the spring, but with the explosion from Palestine, the moment is now. So, if anyone wants to contribute to that effort, you can go to my Twitter. There are all kinds of ways to donate. You can find me on Patreon at Uncaptured Media. My pinned tweet has a link to go buy me a coffee. You can contribute there. So the sooner I'm able to fundraise, the sooner I'll be able to finish and release this documentary. But I wish I could say more. As soon as I'm able to secure the rights to it, to secure the documentary, I'll release a trailer, and this I think will show what it's really about.
I look forward to it. Now, your courage, your integrity shines like a beacon, and there are others who are Jewish. In his case, is also an Israeli and living and working in Israel. How's that for courage? Gideon Levy traverses the country. He was yesterday down in the south. He was visiting the kibbutz that were attacked by the Palestinian fighters, where people had lost people, family members, and so on. And of course, he rightly enunciates a sense of anguish and pain for people's loss, and yet makes the point that Netanyahu is to blame for this. Now, it's only a few months ago that everybody was saying that, Dan. Every liberal journalist in the world was denouncing Netanyahu. Just weeks ago, actually. How have they found it so easy to forget all that and fall in behind Netanyahu and now Gantz in the war party? I don't get it.
It's amazing. It's like the memory of a goldfish. I mean, it wasn't long ago, as you're saying, that they were calling Netanyahu prime minister and demanding he be imprisoned. But those are for kind of smaller crimes in Israeli society, not for the war crimes, the crimes against humanity that he has overseen against the Palestinian people, which is the real, actual, the serious crimes that he's committed. And so once Netanyahu, the failures of the Israeli government led by Netanyahu to anticipate this operation from Gaza, despite warnings from Hamas directly saying that the situation needs to change, the siege needs to be lifted, and warnings from Egyptian intelligence about there was something imminent. All of this was ignored by Netanyahu and his fanatical regime of settlers and Kahanists who are bent on just expanding their colonies in the West Bank and ethnically cleansing Jerusalem. So they completely ignored Gaza, and I think they were drunk on their own power, their hubris. But now that their incredible failures have led to a massive war, of unprecedented scale in Israel, they're all lining up behind him. All of the liberals who were denouncing him are all lining up behind him as some kind of hero. So it's really remarkable. And meanwhile, you have Bezalel Smotrich, one of Netanyahu's top allies, the finance minister, who is now saying, let's not worry about those hostages. We need to hit Gaza really hard. So I think what we have to ask, and what the Israeli public should be asking, is the Israeli military strategy to bomb Gaza so hard that it kills the hostages that are being held undoubtedly underground in the tunnel complex. This would be in line with the Hannibal Directive, which is the Israeli military policy that any soldier that is taken into captivity will be bombed and killed, so their opponents do not have any leverage. That's precisely what happened in 2014 when Al-Qassam, the Palestinian armed group, took captive Hadar Golden in the southern Gaza city of Rafah, and they enacted the Hannibal Directive, bombed the area massively, killed hundreds of Palestinians, and killed Hadar Golden. So we have to ask, is that what they're doing now? But not just with one soldier, with some 150 Israelis, including not only many soldiers and top commanders but also civilians, grandmothers and children, and people who need to be negotiated for their safety promptly. So it's the most cynical thing I've ever seen. And the Israeli public should be outraged at Netanyahu.
I suspect that they will. Gideon Levy said today that this cannot possibly end with Netanyahu still in power, and I'm sure that that is true. How can people find your work, Dan? I know that many will be wanting to, especially after this interview. They'll want to support your film. Tell us where you can most easily be found.
Well, I'm very active on Twitter at Dan Cohen 3000. A lot of my work I do for Redacted, the YouTube or Rumble channel with Clayton and Natalie Morris. And I also have my own small outlet, Uncaptured Media. That's the jumble of letters behind me that you see, where I'll be doing work there as well. So anything, people can contribute, even if it's moral support, I appreciate. But if you can contribute a couple dollars or pounds, then it's much appreciated, and it will help me get towards that goal. So thank you, George, so much.
Thank you, Dan Cohen, for everything that you do and will do in what I'm sure will be a long life of journalism and activism. Is Israel's massive attack on Gaza justified or a war crime? Now 26,650 people have voted. I'll give you the result before the end of the show. But I'll take a 1-minute break here, and I'll be right back. And it's your calls right to the end of the show.
You have to remember back in 2002, 2003, there was a wish by George Bush for regime change. That's what was driving him. Nothing to do with weapons of mass destruction, which of course didn't exist in Iraq. So they had to construct some sort of formula, some sort of cover story in order to persuade the British public that intervention in Iraq was right. Now, David Kelly, as an expert in weapons of mass destruction, knew that this was untrue. He knew that there were probably no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq.
That was a guy that could have brought down the whole system.
I reckon you're chaff. You've been thrown up to divert our probing.
The Foreign Affairs Select Committee, that parliamentarian briefing, I think that was an indignity to him.
We saw it on the news, and my very first thought was shock. Oh my God, this man is in the eye of the media hurricane. He should be protected by that, at least.
You've got blood on your hands, Prime Minister. Are you going to resign over this?
I don't know the details of how Lord Hutton happened to be selected, but what was certainly the case is that he was the right kind of judge to use from the point of view of Downing Street and the intelligence services as well.
Of the 21 days of hearing, only one half of one day was spent on discussing the forensic aspects. That is disgusting.
We were given the Hutton report the day before it was published, but actually what happened was he went too far.
The events of 2003 were disgraceful ones in this country's history, and it's unfinished business. Those responsible for an illegal war, those responsible for the death of David Kelly, have not been brought to justice. There's been no inquest into David Kelly's death. There needs to be one. We need to make sure that those who behaved in a reprehensible way in 2003 are finally brought to book.
Now you can see both my film Killing Kelly and my first film, The Killings of Tony Blair, absolutely free if you support me on Patreon. There's the coordinates, patreon.com/George Galloway. You get Killing Kelly and The Killings of Tony Blair, absolutely free. If you sponsor me on Patreon, it'll cost you less than the cost of a cup of tea per week in an insalubrious cafe. I really need your support on Patreon. Please, if you can, please do so. Will DM, one of my patrons, on The Killings of Tony Blair, says, "Thank you for sharing your film It's an outstanding piece of work, as I assumed it would be. I remember my late father's remarks about Blair vividly. Quote, I will vote for him, but I don't trust him, unquote. What sage words they proved to be. Well, God rest his soul, Will, and thank you for your support and how sage these words were indeed. On the poll, MOATS Legend, that's the higher level of supporter of mine on Patreon, Hafsa, says, let's not sugarcoat what Israel is doing. The guise of self-defense is in fact genocide being committed against the Palestinians, pure and simple. Those that speak out against the apartheid are shown the anti-Semite card and blacklisted for life, like Jeremy Corbyn. And MOATS graduate John C. says, without doubt, Israel are the aggressors. Bit by bit, they've been strangling the Palestinians since 1948. They are not interested in peace and fairness. For Biden to talk about evil after Japan and Vietnam, the Americans murdered millions with the atom bomb and napalm in both countries. He has definitely lost his marbles. And Scouser Lar says, it really disturbs me how the so-called mainstream media and politicians are normalizing attacks on civilians in Gaza by constantly saying Israel have the right to defend themselves. Do the Palestinians not have the right to resist their occupation? It's the equivalent of the RAF levelling Dublin or Dundalk in response to the IRA. Utterly absurd and criminal. Jeanette is on the line from Scotland, but on Palestine. Go ahead, Jeanette.
Absolute pleasure to talk to you, George. I've been following you for 20-odd years, and there's so many things that I would like to discuss with you, and you have two amazing guests on tonight, which are so appropriate on the Palestine situation, George. But this is a general global question I've got for you, and I've been trying to figure it out for myself, but I can't. So I need your help. What is the difference between the neocon ideology, the Zionist ideology, and the Nazi ideology? Please help me, George.
Okay, well, there's a very significant difference. Nazism is unique. The Holocaust is unique, not just in scale, but intention. The avowed, explicit purpose of the Holocaust was to eliminate every single living Jew on the earth. And they constructed an entire industry of death camps and gas chambers in order to bring that about. You arrived on a train, you got selected. It was like swipe left or swipe right. If you looked like you had some slave labor in you, or that you might be able to be experimented upon by Mengele type demons in white doctor's coats, you went that way, and you might live for another few weeks, even months. But if you went that way, you were told to get into the showers, and in fact, instead of water, Zyklon B tumbled down on you and your children usually, and systematically gassed millions of people to death. So, however bad is Netanyahu, he is not Hitler. He is not planning to systematically, industrially annihilate every Palestinian on the earth. He's bad enough without that hyperbole, because that hyperbole is used to discredit us. We have to be careful about ontology, is the word. Ontology, the science of properly identifying things, phenomena, organizations, people, properly identifying them, placing them properly in the spectrum of things. That's why I was virtually certain, you can't be entirely certain, because there are always psychopaths in organizations, that the beheading of the babies was a fake story as soon as I heard it. Because Hamas, which I have opposed all of my life, Hamas are not ISIS. This is a false synonym. Utterly false. In fact, Hamas killed ISIS and Al-Qaeda people when they began to emerge at the height of the ISIS phenomenon in Gaza. Hamas are a part of the Muslim Brotherhood, the Ikhwan Muslimin, which is the rival to ISIS and Al-Qaeda and their mentality. And moreover, I should say that ISIS and Al-Qaeda were being supported by us in the West when they were beheading people in huge numbers in Syria. I said to William Hague, then the Foreign Secretary, when we were, unfortunately for him, stuck in a lift together in Parliament, that you have given the knives to these people. And I pointed out that if he wasn't lucky, they might end up in this building with those knives that you have given them. So I was almost entirely certain that this methodology of ISIS-type terror was not the ideology of Hamas. And in any case, the Palestinian resistance is not only Hamas. There are many other factions who were involved in this prison break. And of course, as I've been saying all night, the Palestinian people themselves are not Hamas. Half of them are kids and cannot be Hamas by definition. Now, on the neocons, virtually to a man and woman, are big supporters of Israel. It's not entirely clear why. It's not entirely clear yet why this huge camp of Trump supporters that were demanding freedom of speech, denouncing identity politics and so on, just a week ago, have actually gone 180 degrees and become the most fanatic supporters of the ultimate identity politics of supporting to the nth degree an ethno-religious state. How's that for identity politics? I've got to say, many will disagree, but I'm sure of what I'm going to say. The common denominator to be found amongst everyone that I can see that is fanatically supporting Netanyahu this evening, the common denominator is race. The common denominator is the racist belief that actually Arabs, maybe even people with brown skins in general, are human animals. They are less than us. Their blood is worth less than ours. And when I see the supporters, for example, of Nigel Farage, who's gone completely berserk for Israel. Who knew? Never heard you say that before, Nigel. The common denominator is their hatred of Muslims, their hatred of Arabs, their hatred of Muslims. That's the only common denominator I've been able to identify. Tell me if I'm wrong. Thanks, Jeanette, for a lovely call. Neda is in Northampton. She's a woman from Gaza, but living in the UK. Give me your point of view, Neda.
Hi, George. How are you?
Good.
you said, I'm currently living in England. My family is currently in Gaza, and I'm just like worried sick about like what's going on there. And it's just like very frustrating to be like to see the headlines of the newspapers in England of like one-sided and turning blind eye about like all the children being killed and innocent people in Gaza as we speak, and they're justifying it, and it's just like I just can't comprehend that. I'm actually worried about.
It's difficult to comprehend. I want to ask you about your family. Are you still able to be in touch with them? I know with the electricity out, all this darkness, people cannot charge their telephones. Are you able to keep in contact with your family?
My family is one of the fortunate families that I still can get in touch with them till now. We don't know till when this is gonna last. I don't know. It's just so frustrating and just very stressful. I'm worried about it, like invasion, and what would that mean? Like, it's just scary times, and there's a lot of speculations, and I would like to know your opinion. What would that mean to people in Gaza, like civilians in Gaza?
It would be a complete catastrophe for everyone involved. And I'm going to stick my neck out. I have a feeling that it will not happen. Not just because the likely casualties amongst Israeli conscripts, and remember, almost all of the Israeli soldiers are conscripts, part-time soldiers, reservists. The death toll amongst them, and of course the very large number that will be taken prisoner or hostage, will be enormous. They've got 150 now. Try 1,500 or many, many more than that, which would be the result of any ground invasion. The terrain, every inch of it, is known by the defenders and not known by definition by the poor bloody conscript that will be sent in with a gun to fight amongst the rubble. That's one reason, but the bigger reason is that a ground invasion brings Hezbollah into the war. And as we've seen today, from a false alarm, the ability of Hezbollah to send the Israeli society reeling is very large indeed. And behind them stands all the allies that I've talked about earlier. So my gut feeling is that there will not be, but if there is, then it could very well end up not just in a regional war, but in something even worse than that. Last word to you, Neda.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate your broadcast.
La shukra ala wajib,
thanks.
Habibti. La shukra ala wajib. Thank you so much. YouTube comment. Sean Butterley says, worth noting Israel's usual urge and willingness to indiscriminately carpet bomb Gaza, resulting in the sure deaths of civilians, and the methodical Russian tactic in Ukraine to avoid such carnage. Can you imagine if Russia was dealing with Kiev like Israel is dealing with Gaza? Constructive Economics says, this event stands as a remarkable guerrilla militant assault akin to General Hannibal's historic victory at Cannae against a top-tier military institution. And Kubla Khan says, an eye for an eye, and very soon the whole world will be blind. And Odell, 84, says, Rishi stands with Israel and Keir stands with Israel. I stand with humanity. It's not self-defense. when you drop cluster bombs on children and turn off the electricity in hospitals and cut off food and water. Well said. 28,444 people have voted now in the polls. I'll give it another 5 minutes. If you want to vote in that poll, do so, please, in the next 5 minutes. Back to the lines. Our old friend Fra in Belfast is on the line. Go ahead, Fra.
Thank you very much, George. I really appreciate you taking my call. George, thank God we have people like you, eloquent, intelligent, and fact-based on what's happening in West Asia, the Middle East, Palestine, Israel, Iran, etc., etc., etc. Your knowledge is unparalleled. George, I had the honour of going with you to Gaza in 2010 on a Viva Palestina aid convoy. We were 35 days on the road, at the end of which I was able to spend 3 days in Gaza after Operation Cast Lead. So I too have seen the destruction on the ground, the desecration of the mosques, the murder and maiming of the people in Palestine. And from being inspired by you to go on that convoy, subsequently some of the guys on the convoy set up a registered charity. Our registered charity number is 102274, and our name is Palestine Aid. People can follow us on Facebook, Palestine Aid Belfast, and we have a crowdfunder account, which is Palestine Aid Belfast on crowdfunder. George, part of the reason why I phoned up is every time there's this huge onslaught on Gaza, which leaves thousands dead, and many women and children, thousands, if not tens of thousands, maimed for the rest of their lives. We see huge demonstrations all over the world, including Dublin, and including Belfast, and including Derry, and including London, and different cities and Glasgow throughout the UK. People often ask, what can we possibly do to help? Well, I'm offering people that opportunity to help. I'm offering people the opportunity to make either monthly donations or one-off donations to our crowdfunder account. We are all volunteers. There is no CEO earning £100,000 per year. Every penny we get goes to Gaza. And so far, from the inspiration of going to Gaza on your convoy, we have paid $10,000 to the Al-Amal orphanage in Gaza for a solar panel project. We have paid for 3 university graduation fees in midwifery, in child psychology and in law at the Islamic University in Gaza. And from the last major
which is no
incursion,
more.
What's that, George?
Which is no more. Yeah, the university that you supported is literally now a ruin. It is in rubble. Well, thanks, Fra, for that. I'm sure people will take you up on it. I hope they do. Jacqueline is in South Wales. We've got so many people trying to get on the show. I'm afraid a lot of people are going to be disappointed. Yagia Brenner says, these poor kids, my prayer goes out to them and their mothers. The Brain says, why won't Egypt open their border for Palestinians? Well, first of all, Egypt is not allowed to open its border for Palestinians. Israel will not permit it to do so most of the time. And secondly, why should Egypt take the Palestinians? Why can't they be left alive in Palestine? Ask yourself that. Do you want the whole 2.2 million Palestinians to leave Palestine? That's how this whole thing started. Don't punish the victim. Punish the aggressor, not the victim. Jacqueline is on the line in South Wales on Palestine. Go ahead, Jacqueline.
Oh, hello, George. Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, the whole world's listening. Go ahead quickly, please.
Oh, right. George, I was just wondering, with your extensive knowledge of Palestine, Israel, or the Middle East, why is it you're not on the main media, BBC, ITV, Sky, etc.?
Well, Jacqueline, if you look on YouTube at my biggest ever television encounter, it was on Sky News in 2008. More than 100 million people have watched it. You'll see, I describe it as my greatest victory. You'll see what happened when Sky News invited me on, and they will not do so again. They cannot do so again because the case that they are shilling for is so weak and threadbare that anyone with the, well, first of all, the courage to challenge it, secondly, the knowledge to challenge it, will tear their case apart. And they can't afford that because this case gets annually less defendable. And so to have someone like me on, it would be Mike Tyson in the ring with Jacob Rees-Mogg. It would not be credible. But here's the rub, Jacqueline. I am speaking to far more people right now, and over the next 3 days until we get to the next show, I'm speaking to far more people than watch BBC or ITN. Certainly Sky News, that's watched by hardly anybody now at all. And the so-called GB News, whose commitment to free speech turned out not to be worth a dime, last night, at peak time, was talking to 11,000 people. Well, so Jacqueline, you've come to the right place. The mother of all talk shows, a global university of the airwaves, where 10 million people have engaged with our output on this subject in the last 72 hours. Rodney is in Pennsylvania, but again, on Palestine. Rodney, what would you like to say?
Yes, George, I just want to share my experience as a Lebanese. We got a taste of Israeli occupation, and the viewers should have a memory span longer than a few days. When Israel was in Lebanon, whenever we tried to make any maneuver through armed resistance to get the Israelis out, the entire South Lebanese population was punished severely and inhumanely. You remember the bombardment campaigns in South Lebanon that killed hundreds of civilians whenever they were launched by Israel. And just for the viewers to know, Gaza is a microcosm of occupation and dehumanization. And whenever the Arab, the Palestinian, be it, or the Lebanese or the Iraqi, hits back, all of a sudden CNN remembers to turn the camera toward Palestine and Israel. I got into the habit of counting Palestinian casualties on a daily basis without CNN or any of the U.S. news outlet making any mention of daily Palestinian casualties. Daily Palestinians were kidnapped, men, women, and children. The destruction of water sources, the confiscation of land, the notion of expanding Jewish settlements on Palestinian land. American media would never bring a piece of news regarding Israel's daily violations of basic human rights, Israel's brutality, Israel's genocide. However, when a settler is killed in the town of Hawara, you will see it all over CNN. You will see it all over the global news. The American media is complicit in the destruction of the Palestinian people. They are complicit in perpetuating the Israeli occupation. And on Saturday, George, when the news about the conflict broke out, guess who was delivering news to the American public? American Zionist Jews on CNN. Wolf Blitzer, Dana Bash, Tapper, every dual citizen American/Israeli was on TV, fashioning the news to the American public. And they dare to use the word
Well, the good news, though,
attack.
Unprovoked. It's the least unprovoked conflict in the entire history of conflict. 75 years of provoked. But the good news is, we just heard from Dan Cohen, a brave and brilliant young Jewish man, standing up for the Palestinians and standing up to threats to kill him. We have the shining example of Gideon Levy, frequent guest on this show, not just Jewish, but an Israeli Jew. We have Ilan Pappé, the author of the seminal book on Gaza, the largest prison camp in the world, I think it's called. Ilan Pappé, a former Israeli professor. We have so many in America and in Britain of brave and brilliant Jewish people. Some of them famous, some of them not yet famous, some of them still at university, some of them professors before they got fired for telling the truth about this subject. This darkest hour has provided some of its brightest moments in the courage and eloquence of Jewish people in Britain and in the United States. Thanks, Rodney, in Pennsylvania. Hamza is on from the UAE, United Arab Emirates, but on Palestine. Go ahead, Hamza.
How you doing, George?
By the grace of God, I'm still here. Go ahead.
Fantastic. I'm actually originally from London, George. And I've been listening to your show. I started listening to you when you were on Talk Sport. Can you remember that?
Wow. I remember it very fondly.
And I used to listen to it in my car, and I was absolutely amazed, because you're the only one that was actually given a true reflection of the conflict in Palestine. And I never actually got a chance to call you. I eventually kind of left the UK because I'm sick of the politics, the crime, the morality, and I've been in the UAE for the last 5-6 years. But I've called you today because I'm just trying to get someone decent to talk to. What's really hurting me now is the reaction of these Western powers, the politicians, and you being a man who has experience in politics, I wanted to get your take on this. Why do they find it so difficult to show some kind of support for the civilians in Gaza? Are they all mad and evil?
It's
or
difficult,
is it something in politics?
A lot of them are. No, a lot of them are, Hamza, actually wicked and evil. Some of them are just stooges, not worth even bothering about. They're fodder for their masters. But the slave owners, if you like, are wicked and evil in many, many, many cases. Joe Biden is an evil man, truly evil, and for 50 years has been so. These other hirelings, Blinken and so on, here today, gone tomorrow. Blinken won't be remembered 6 months after the next presidential election. He and people like him are not actually worth my breath, given that I don't have that many breaths left and given the hour. So I'll answer you this way, Hamza. The Western leaders, from Ms. Wong in Australia, trust me, if she showed up in Israel in any ordinary times, she'd get to realize what they think of people that look like her and are called Miss Wong. James Cleverly, in any ordinary time, if he hadn't been the Foreign Secretary of the UK, if he showed up in Israel looking like he does, he wouldn't have a very happy experience in Israel, as any black person there or who's ever been there will be able to tell you. Israel was convicted of secretly and forcibly sterilizing Ethiopian Jews who came to Israel. Miss Wong and Miss Cleverly, who'll remember them? But the big leaders, Macron, Sunak, Schultz, Meloni, and these other Western leaders are all acting under orders of the United States of America. Israel doesn't control the United States. The United States controls Israel, as it controls Britain, France, Germany, and all the other satrap states. And when Joe Biden said in a rare moment of truth, more than 30 years ago, but you can still see the video, when he said in the Senate, if Israel didn't exist, we would have to invent it. He was telling the truth. Israel's function and purpose is to serve the interests of the empire, now the American Empire, formerly the British Empire, the European settler colonial projects that existed everywhere. In Mozambique, in Angola, in Cape Verde, in Rhodesia, in Zambia, in South Africa. These European colonial projects in West Africa, they were French, were for a purpose. They were scrambling for Africa so they could loot it. In earlier times, loot even the people and take them as slaves. They made Israel, and they said so openly. We must make in Israel, said the British government at the time of the Balfour Declaration, a loyal British Ulster in the Middle East, one that would do our bidding, control the area for us, allow us to continue looting the resources of the Arab world, that will turn everyone against each other, divide so we can rule. That was the purpose of the British in 1917 when they issued the Balfour Declaration. And it is the purpose, as Biden told us 30 years ago in the US Senate. They are working for us, not the other way around. Thanks, Hamza, for calling from the UAE. I'm afraid I've got some sad news. We've just received the news that Norma from Bristol, the legend, has been in touch to let us know that her husband, John, has died this evening. They were 62 years happily married. Norma called a little earlier and understandably didn't want to come on the show tonight. I'm sure we all, and I hope you'll join me in this, all send her our love and support at this very difficult time. God rest his soul, Norma. I'll perhaps be able to say more when next you're able to come on the show. But let me say that may he rest in peace, your dear deceased husband, Norma, in Bristol. It's been a difficult show, been a difficult 3-4 days. I'm up till 5 o'clock in the morning, as some of you will have seen with the time on my social media activity. I'm up through the night, I can't sleep. As the father of 6 children myself, I'm particularly fixated on the total disaster in which the Palestinian children are now trapped, literally trapped, in Gaza. I have been, for more than 50 years, active in this cause. This means that children that I met 50 years ago are now grandfathers and grandmothers of today's Palestinian children. As was referred to, I led convoys of aid, 20, 30 days on the road, trying to break the siege of Gaza. This subject is a red line for me. I've blocked people that were friends of mine because, in the words of Elvis Costello when he said, "Somebody better put out the big light, I can't bear to see you this way." I cannot bear and will not bear people making light or behaving in an opportunist way towards this catastrophe that is now being faced by millions of people with nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. I will not remain silent for opportunistic reasons. Trust me, I have many times over the last 50 years wished I could get out, but I keep getting pulled back in. Once when I was running for Mayor of London, I got off our campaign bus in Kilburn, on the Kilburn High Road in London. And as I got off the bus, I found myself in the arms of an elderly Jewish man with the precious uniform of Jewish ex-servicemen's regalia, a man who'd fought fascism and Hitlerism in the Second World War and was proudly wearing the beret and the insignia and so on. And so we ended up in a kind of embrace. And he said to me, "If you'd been with us, you'd have made it all the way to number 10 Downing Street." And he gave me a hug and I went on my way. But I could never have been with Israel, though most of my fellows in Parliament were only too eager to do so. Here I stand. I can do no other. Until my last breath, I will stand here, and after me, my sons, my daughters, and my grandchildren, and I hope many millions of others. I have actually watched the support base for Palestine grow over that 50 years from a few hundreds to many millions. And those millions in Britain and in America, those millions now know they have nobody to vote for. If you vote for Rishi Sunak, or if you vote for Sir KeirStarmer, or if you vote for whichever joker is today in charge of the Liberal Democrats, if you vote for any of those, you are voting for massacre in Gaza. And in a way, fundamentally, that is the most depressing fact of them all. Thanks for joining us. I hope very much to see you on Sunday for the mother of all talk shows at the earlier time of 7 p.m. UK time. It's the mothership. I no longer have to appeal to you to bring another viewer because the viewers are coming in, Billy O. Thank you very much indeed.